On this Thursday night, the vital military mission on home soil.
The women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces will always be there to help Canadians.
The soldiers inside care homes helping save lives. Canada ramps up testing for COVID-19, but still has a long way to go. What's taking so long? The rare syndrome linked to COVID-19, putting some children into intensive care. Plus, internet giants, traditional media, and money. The future of journalism and the fight to even the playing field.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with a promise the Prime Minister made to the thousands of people who work in long-term care homes in this country, usually for low pay and often part-time. Justin Trudeau said in mid-April he'd make sure they get a boost in pay, but there was no detail. Today he went a bit further, saying the provinces and territories have agreed to provide a wage top-up.
It will be up to each province and territory to determine who exactly qualifies for this wage increase, but the bottom line is this. If you're risking your health to keep this country moving and you're making minimum wage, you deserve a raise.
The federal government, provinces and territories have committed to spending $4 billion on the top-up. It's unclear who exactly will get it and when they'll get it. What is clear is that people in Canadian long-term care homes have suffered the most in this pandemic. 81% of deaths from COVID-19 are linked to care homes. Hundreds of staff have tested positive. Some have died. There's such a shortage of staff now. Soldiers are looking after seniors in multiple care homes. In Quebec, more than 1,000 troops are supporting 20 long-term care facilities, and that number is expected to grow by mid-May. In Ontario, 256 members are helping in 5 long-term care homes in Pickering, Toronto, and Brampton. This kind of work is not what members of the armed forces signed up for. It's not what they're trained for. But as Mike Armstrong reports, they've found themselves on a new front line.
There is no way to know how many people have died at this Montreal seniors residence. The provincial government stopped making those numbers public last week. At that point, they'd lost close to 50 residents, and Thursday morning, the funeral home van was again taking away a body. It is, according to the soldiers now assigned to this facility, something they're getting used to. Each residence's military team is split into 3 units doing 8-hour shifts. They're on site 24/7. Most of this group is from an armored regiment. This isn't how they'd normally be dressed.
C'est étrange, mais c'est nécessaire parce que...
Trooper Brendan Soucy calls it strange but necessary and says the troops are very careful. At last count, this facility had close to 200 COVID-19 cases, about 2/3 of the entire facility. They were severely short of staff, and what they did have was overwhelmed at times. How much of the soldiers helped?
On peut respirer un petit peu.
We can breathe a bit, says Martine Robichaud. It's a huge support. Now, for most of the troops, what they're doing is completely new, but each team does have Canadian Armed Forces medical personnel attached. To do that, the forces had to pull in medical personnel from across the country, meaning the normal support on bases right now is bare bones.
We are all in and going as quickly as possible in support of this endeavor.
Most regular positions in a long-term care facility take about 700 hours of training. The soldiers have gotten about 5. Their tasks are not medical, but for some they can include moving and even cleaning seniors, many of the things orderlies might do. But there is concern some might have emotional difficulty in a setting where people are dying.
We've put some measures in place to make sure that guys can talk about what they see and how they feel, so there are resources available for us.
The forces are not releasing numbers on how many soldiers contract COVID-19, citing security concerns, but the federal defense minister does admit coming out of this crisis there may be changes. Supporting Canadians in the future could mean the forces need more troops trained for medical emergencies. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
In Ontario, about 3/4 of the people who have died from COVID-19 are residents in long-term care. There are outbreaks reported in 225 facilities now, and 681 deaths have been reported. Ontario's premier said again today the system needs to be fixed.
We know the system's broken, but we're going to have a complete review, not just of long-term care. I think the whole system of government, there's better ways of doing things. We've all seen it, more efficient ways of doing things, and there's definitely going to be a review.
Here's the picture across the country right now. Quebec continues to have the most cases and the most deaths from COVID-19. More than 35,000 people have tested positive in Quebec. That's an increase of more than 900 today. More than 2,600 people are known to have died from COVID-19 in Quebec. Ontario added nearly 400 new cases today. That brings the total there to over 19,000. More than 1,400 people have died in Ontario. Newfoundland and Labrador reported 2 new cases today after 5 straight days of no new ones. BC and Ontario have announced plans to resume elective surgery. The pandemic has caused a huge backlog. 30,000 people in BC had their non-urgent scheduled surgeries canceled because of COVID-19. Some will restart on May 18th, but it could take up to 2 years to work through the whole backlog. BC plans to hire 400 nurses, plus more surgeons, anesthesiologists, and cleaning staff, and eventually conduct surgery in the evenings and on weekends. It plans to have operating rooms back at full capacity by June.
Right now, we're at about 4,600 emergency room visits a day from the previous average of about 6,500. So people are reluctant at times to come to hospitals, so we have to prepare for that.
This was a very difficult decision to make, the right decision to make, but as we made it, we were mindful that these were not just numbers on spreadsheets, these were human beings.
Health officials in Ontario say it could take weeks or months to work through the backlog there, and medical staff will be asked to undertake virtual consultations and to operate on weekends. Hospitals will also need to ensure they keep 15% capacity to respond to a possible surge in COVID-19 cases and ensure there's a 30-day supply of PPE for frontline healthcare workers. The Quebec government has again pushed back the date for reopening elementary schools, daycares, and businesses in the Montreal area. It won't happen now until May 25th. Quebec's premier says Montreal's high COVID-19 infection rate and the lack of staff in the healthcare system are that province's biggest challenges. Montreal has more confirmed cases of the virus than any other Canadian city. There is a confirmed outbreak of COVID-19 at another Canadian meat processing plant, this one in Ontario. The union representing workers at Maple Lodge Farm says 25 workers have tested positive for the virus and 1 has died. Internal documents obtained by Global News show the Brampton facility waited nearly 3 weeks before publicly disclosing the first COVID-19 case. The poultry processing plant is still open, but with safety measures in place. Testing, lots of testing, is key to being able to safely reopen the economy and identify and contain any new outbreaks. Today, Canada reached a testing milestone. More than 1 million people have now been tested for COVID-19. Though, as Heather Yourex-West explains, there's much more that could and should be done.
At drive-thrus and other testing sites across the country, testing capacity has ramped up. But as Canada moves towards easing restrictions, the need for more testing is more important than ever.
When we're able to see more cases happening in the community with increased testing, you can see if another outbreak is about to happen. You can see it much earlier, and hopefully we can prevent having to go into this massive lockdown again.
Alberta still leads the pack, while Ontario, which struggled with testing early on, has shown big improvement, though that province admits it still struggles to hit its capacity target each day.
The only way we can get a handle on this is to have a very strong testing program, along with the contact tracing as well.
But Ontario is far from alone. Canada has capacity to test 60,000 people each day, but only about 25,000 tests daily are being performed.
In a jurisdiction that actually has the epidemic under control, you may not be testing as much because you don't actually have cases. And we've heard from provinces that now that there's no respiratory virus sort of season, they're actually getting very few people coming in for testing.
But testing the sick should only be one part of the country's testing strategy.
There should be some sort of surveillance in different regions to really ensure that we can detect cases in areas that so we can detect cases early enough and pounce on this such that it doesn't spiral out of control.
That means testing more people without symptoms. Asymptomatic testing is being done in provinces like Alberta, but even there, strategies around exactly who should be tested are still being worked out. And so even that province is seeing much of its test capacity each day go to waste.
We could do up to about 7,000 a day. And the volumes lately have been anywhere between, say, 3,000 and 5,000 a day.
Thousands of opportunities to catch the virus early being missed every day. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Children have been spared in this pandemic. Experts aren't sure why, but kids who test positive rarely develop serious symptoms. There is, though, a baffling new syndrome emerging in a very small number of kids that may be related to COVID-19. The UK was the first to alert doctors to it, and now Canada's Pediatric Society is raising the alarm too. Crystal Goomansingh reports.
The medical world is turning its eye to children. A new multi-system inflammatory syndrome is making some kids sick.
More than half of them were gastro symptoms, so that's vomiting or diarrhea or abdominal pain. And then some of them had red eyes, some of them had rashes.
Dr. Sanjay Patel says the syndrome is associated with COVID-19, but how or why isn't known. Most children are only mildly affected by the pandemic virus, if at all, but a handful in the UK have ended up with an inflammatory response. Some tested negative for COVID-19, but ended up with antibodies in their blood.
We have to be responsible with how we communicate this. It was absolutely right for the doctors managing these children in London to raise awareness amongst doctors looking after children.
The signal to doctors is growing in scope. The UK cases surfaced in late April. Since then, the syndrome has been identified in 7 countries, including Canada. But worldwide, only a small number of children have been affected, roughly 130. Still, the Canadian Pediatric Society is getting set to issue an alert about it next week.
The important message for families is, first and foremost, to not be alarmed, that this is an incredibly rare condition. Case numbers globally continue to be very, very small.
There have been a few of these inflammatory syndrome cases in children in Canada. Still, hospitalization rates of people under 19 with COVID-19 are low, 26 according to the Public Health Agency of Canada. 12-year-old Juliet Daly ended up in hospital. She's back home now in New Orleans recovering. One of the rare cases of the new inflammatory syndrome being studied around the world. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
A multi-million-dollar investment comes to nothing. Coming up, why the plug's been pulled on plans for this high-tech neighborhood. Plus, more turmoil at the mall. What's in store for some popular retailers? Greyhound Canada is suspending all of its remaining bus services and temporarily laying off 400 workers because of a lack of passengers. Beginning May 13th, Greyhound will suspend all of its routes in eastern Canada until further notice. The company canceled services in Western Canada in 2018 because of low ridership and recently scaled back other services because of COVID-19. Greyhound says ticket sales have fallen 95% since the pandemic began. Construction plans have also stalled. Sidewalk Labs, a company affiliated with Google, abandoned its plan to build a high-tech suburb on Toronto's waterfront, citing unprecedented economic uncertainty surrounding COVID-19. The company spent years and millions of dollars developing a proposal for the so-called smart city. It still needed full government approval, but now the company says it's too difficult to make the project financially viable without sacrificing key parts of it. Montreal-based shoe chain Aldo Group has filed for creditor protection and plans to restructure. The company says it will continue to operate online during that restructuring, and it intends to reopen its stores once restrictions associated with the pandemic are lifted. Aldo has about 8,000 employees and manages about 700 shoe stores. And Neiman Marcus, the 112-year-old U.S. luxury department store chain, has filed for bankruptcy protection. The company was already saddled with debt. The health crisis has only made it worse. It's closing 43 stores. The bankruptcy filing is a blow to the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, which was part of a $6 billion deal to buy Neiman Marcus in 2013. On Monday, U.S. clothing company J.Crew also filed for bankruptcy. Analysts expect 100,000 stores could close by 2025, accelerated by the pandemic. The struggling retail industry is one sector fueling the U.S. jobless rate. More than 33 million Americans have now filed for unemployment aid in 7 weeks since the outbreak began. Of that number, 3.2 million people filed just in the last week. Dead or alive? Still ahead, the big debate over big oil in Canada. All kinds of people are out of work because of this pandemic, and multiple industries are suffering, including the oil and gas sector. Weeks ago, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised federal help was on the way. Some has been delivered to clean up orphaned well sites, and there's pressure to leave it at that. The leader of the Green Party says oil is dead. The Bloc Québécois leader doesn't believe Alberta's oil sands should be bailed out. It is a hot topic. Abigail Beeman has been following the reaction tonight. Abigail, let's begin with the Prime Minister.
Well, Donna, Global News asked the Prime Minister if he shared the sentiments of those politicians, and he was unequivocal.
I don't share that assessment. We need to support Albertans and other people working in the energy sector through this incredible, difficult time.
He gave a similar answer in committee this afternoon. A Conservative MP asked a question about the Bloc and Green comments in a way Elizabeth May didn't like, and we got one of the first examples of what heckling virtually looks like.
Will the Prime Minister stand up for Canada's energy workers, or does he agree with the fringe left and those who want to destroy our country?
But I believe that the language that the honourable member just used is unparliamentary.
That's not a
we
point
can
of
have
order.
differences of opinion, but it is absolutely
Debate.
unacceptable
Debate.
and violates my privileges.
Debates. Meanwhile, in Alberta, the Premier focused his response on the Bloc Québécois.
The leader of the Bloc Québécois seems to be obsessed with attacking the people of Alberta for having generated an enormous amount of wealth that we have shared willingly with our fellow Canadians, and particularly with our fellow Canadians in the province of Quebec.
Like I said, hot topic, Abigail. The Prime Minister also talks about the need to transition to green energy and to lower emissions. So how is the oil industry reacting to what he says?
Well, Donna, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers tells Global News they were happy with Trudeau's answer. They felt the oil industry was supported, but they also say no one knows where that industry will be in a year from now. In a recent earnings call, the CFO of Shell said they don't even know if demand, devastated during the pandemic, will come back. Still, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers says that's still a far cry from a dead industry.
You know, I think it's a foolish thing to say when every single Canadian can look at their personal circumstances on a daily basis and how it's been touched by the moving of transportation, movement of goods, the food we eat. All of it is reliant on oil and gas.
But today, Elizabeth May doubled down on those comments, writing a magazine op-ed with the headline, "The reports of oil's death are not greatly exaggerated." Donna?
All right, Abigail Beeman in Ottawa, thank you. Next, fighting for the future of news. When a major news event happens, Canadians expect journalists to be there. And during times of crisis, like a pandemic, people turn to news organizations they know and trust. Ratings are up across the board right now, but ad revenue is plummeting. COVID-19 has sped up a problem that's been plaguing the industry, especially newspapers, for years. Though, as Eric Sorensen explains, two international tech giants are still reaping rewards.
At a time when journalism is so vital, many of the biggest newspapers in the country are imploring Ottawa to confront internet giants Facebook and Google. Newspapers are hurting. In recent days, new cutbacks, the Kingsville Reporter and more than a dozen other community papers in Ontario and Manitoba are closing. Major publishers who normally compete have signed a joint letter stating they are suffering huge advertising revenue declines because of the coronavirus pandemic and are calling on Ottawa to make Google and Facebook pay their fair share. It's estimated 80% of digital advertising worldwide flows to Google and Facebook, but they don't pay Canadian news providers for their content.
The big internet companies have been getting a free ride.
This executive for Global News parent company says broadcasting is also suffering. While news ratings are up, advertising revenue is down.
The reality is these internet companies who have almost monopoly status over how Canadians access content through the internet are not remitting any of their revenue back to the publishers who are creating the value at the end of that chain.
In France, Australia, and elsewhere, governments are taking action. The digital giants are thriving in this crisis, says the French finance minister, who is proposing an EU tax on them.
I can assure you that Minister Guilbeault is working very hard and very closely with allies around the world.
Recently, the Prime Minister did not deem it a priority, but now sounds more committed.
We need the media now during a crisis more than we ever have.
A close ally of the Prime Minister on free trade and president of Unifor, which represents some Global News employees, Jerry Diaz is critical of Ottawa's foot-dragging on internet companies.
The media outlets around this country are getting slaughtered, and the government's doing absolutely nothing. When we have wholesale carnage in the media industry, that hurts the democracy of the country.
Facebook declined to comment, though some social sites do also drive consumers to Canadian news sites. But by not paying taxes here or for content, internet titans are not recognizing their obligation, says this journalism authority.
These large internet aggregators need to acknowledge the fact that they are basically taking away the work product of other media organizations without fair compensation.
At the same time as our product, our news product, is more in demand than ever, media businesses are facing a deeper threat to their bottom line than ever.
And media companies' bottom line is just one of many the government must deal with these days. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. We leave you tonight with a salute from the skies. This is how the Canadian Forces snowbirds say thank you. They're doing flyovers across the country. It's called Operation Inspiration, dedicated to those doing their part to fight the spread of COVID-19. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.